Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon, streaming on Sunday, September 8th, 2024. Today we have a fascinating conversation in store for you on some of the emerging breakthroughs in the areas of human augmentation as well as longevity medicine. Joining us today is our distinguished panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers and members, including our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our current Vice Chairman and Legislative Director, Jason Geringer, our member, Alan Crowley of the Transhumanist Party of Texas, and our special guest today is also our Director of Scholarship, Dr. Dan Elton. You are quite familiar with him if you have observed many of our virtual enlightenment salons, and Dan attends quite a large number of transhumanist events, many of them now in the Boston, Massachusetts area, which has become quite a hub of interest in emerging technologies. Recently, Dan attended the Human Augmentation Summit, which took place on August 24th, 2024. It was hosted by the Augmentation Lab. You can see the website of the Augmentation Lab at augmentationlab.org, and you can also visit the YouTube channel of the Augmentation Lab. And then a week later, on August 31st, Dan also attended an event with Dr. David Sinclair and Manolis Kellis in Marblehead, Massachusetts. So we are looking forward to learning about what transpired at both of those events, what kinds of discussions were held, what technologies were showcased. Thank you, Dan, for joining us today, and you have the floor.
Okay, thanks, Gennady. Yeah, I just threw together this presentation. So what happened is recently I learned about this group called the Augmentation Lab. It's actually been around about 2 years. And what they do is they have a summer residency program where scholars and researchers and technologists come in and to develop interesting ways of not just healing or repairing problems, but actually enhancing human cognition. This Augmentation Lab ran their residency program first in 2023 in the Bay Area, and then in 2024 they ran it in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They are funded partly through the 1517 Fund, which is a well-known Bay Area VC firm. Anyway, so a few weeks ago, I happened to go to an event, which was a social event hosted by Augmentation Lab. I didn't really know what it was, but there was a lot of energy around it, and there was a lot of interesting people there. And actually, one of the women who organizes it, her name's Ada Baradari, and she developed a robotic tail that you can actually control using EEG. And I didn't get to put that into the presentation, but at the social gathering, I was able to see this robotic tail. It's actually quite heavy, but I think that would be of interest to some people in the transhumanist community who believe strongly in morphological freedom. So anyway, to sort of cap off the 2024 residency program, the Augmentation Lab held this Augmentation Summit where the 2024 residents presented their projects, and then a lot of other researchers from MIT also presented human augmentation projects. It was held at the MIT Media Lab. They have a really nice conference center on the 4th floor. The attendees were capped at, I think, around 100, so that there was about 100 people there. I'll share a few slides from the introductory talk. This is kind of showing their whole philosophy. They say, we teach and enable techno-optimists to build a better future with valuable research and ethically aligned products. And what I really like about this group is they're techno-optimistic and they're excited about human enhancement. They actually had t-shirts that said techno on the front, and on the back it said techno-optimist or optimist. So this here shows the timeline for the augmentation residency program 2024. It was an 8-week program. As they show here, the first 2 weeks are around ideation and creating your team. Some people worked as individuals, others worked as teams of 2 to 4 people. And then during this 8-week program, you're expected to create a quote MVP, which is a minimal viable product, actually build it and demo it. And so this augmentation summit was the culmination of 8 weeks of very intense work. Really, this is just a lot of energy and work went into these projects over 8 weeks. So I'll now go through the projects. Now, all these projects are from Augmentation Lab residents, but some of them are also from MIT researchers, especially from the MIT Media Lab. I'll try to point out the residents when I can, but just bear in mind, some of these were Augmentation Lab residents, some of these were other people. I think there were probably about 20 to 30 different projects that were presented either in talks or at the demo hall. I can't cover all of them, but I managed to get pictures of quite a few. So the first person who spoke was actually a performance artist named Avital Meshi, and she's done some interesting projects using the latest AI and technology in interesting ways. So this was a artwork she did. Essentially, it was using a image generation model like DALL-E or Stable Diffusion to create many different versions of herself. So this is almost like a multiverse of people that are different versions of herself that might exist in different universes. So I thought that was kind of cool. But the main thing she talked about was this project called GPT-Me. This is a wearable device, which is really quite simple. Essentially, it uses a Raspberry Pi microcomputer and a 4G LTE connection to have a wearable device that connects to a custom version of ChatGPT. And as you can see, there's 2 buttons on this device. And so when she presses the red button, she can set a what they call system prompt for ChatGPT, which instructs ChatGPT how it's supposed to behave. So for instance, she could press the red button and she could say, "You are a radical feminist." Okay. Now, the interesting thing here is that there's also a microphone and a earpiece, which is concealed. It's a small earpiece. So as she's wearing this device, there's speech to text, and ChatGPT is listening to everything that's going on. So if she's talking to someone, ChatGPT is actually listening to everything that she's saying and everything the other person's saying, and any speech that's happening in the environment. ChatGPT is also listening. And then when she presses the blue button, ChatGPT will actually respond as if it's this person. So basically, you set how you want ChatGPT to respond using the red button, and then you get a response hitting the blue button. So then ChatGPT will respond if you hit the blue button, and it will play in her ear. So what this allows is for her to essentially use ChatGPT as a thought augmentation device. So she did a number of things with this. Apparently, one of them was a performance art display where she was pretending to be a medium. And essentially, she had ChatGPT talking into her ear, telling her what to say in order to be some sort of medium. I wasn't quite sure exactly how this worked, but this was some sort of performance art that she did. Another one she did was she calls the embodiment of the Turing test. And this is where she was be sitting in a room, and in some scenarios it was just her talking to someone else like normal. In other scenarios, she was talking to someone, but she was just repeating what ChatGPT was telling her to say through the earpiece. So they did this experiment to see if people could figure out when it was her speaking normally or whether it was actually her just repeating what ChatGPT was telling her to say. And according to her, people couldn't figure out when it was actually her or whether it was ChatGPT telling her what to say. So I thought that was pretty interesting. This is basically showing that ChatGPT essentially can pass as a human, even with the certain time delays that are involved in getting the response from ChatGPT. People still couldn't figure out that it was actually ChatGPT that was creating the responses. So I thought that was pretty amazing. Now, she had a lot of philosophical questions about this. For instance, sometimes ChatGPT was telling her things that she didn't actually know. And so she was wondering, is this actually making me smarter? Am I being authentic? Is this still myself? And, if I'm using this, she was wondering if I'm using this device, will I be able to think and feel independently? So this is really a direct augmentation of the human using existing technology that is freely available. In fact, I think anyone could probably build this device for just a few $100s, which is pretty neat. So now this is showing the demo hall where I think there were about 20 or even more projects. Again, some of these were Augmentation Lab residents, some of these were MIT researchers, and then there were a few startups from elsewhere that had tables. So I'll share some pictures now from this demo hall. One of the most interesting projects was called Preemie. This is showing, so here, that's the wearable device. So what this is it's a wearable device which allows a mother to essentially have an artificial womb that they are wearing. And right now it's being designed for premature babies. In the future, of course, technology could actually allow for a fully artificial womb where the baby would develop from a fertilized egg. And they think it's very important that the baby is with the mother at all times. So there's an interaction between the mother and the baby. At the very least, there's research showing that babies start to learn language while they're in the womb by listening to their mother. And they think that there's a special emotional connection as well that's developed between the mother and the baby while the baby is in the womb. So what happens right now with premature babies is they are put into a large ventilator. You may have seen pictures of these rather large glass boxes. And that's kind of very unnatural, obviously, but that's necessary since these premature babies are not able to generate enough body temperature to stay at the right temperature. And they also require blood oxygenation. So their whole idea here is they want to utilize a new technology, which is essentially based on these fluid-filled sacs. This new technology has been successfully demonstrated with sheep fetuses, and they're hoping to test it in humans soon. Obviously, there's a lot of safety testing that needs to be done first with animals, which is ongoing, but so far the results are looking good. So they're expecting to be able to test these fluid-filled pouches. What they say here is the fetus is transferred into a fluid-filled bag which mimics the womb. The heart of the fetus is oxygenated using blood that's pumped through what they call the artificial placenta. It's essentially just a pump that oxygenates the blood. And then the fetus can develop with minimal exposure to pathogens. And there's also essentially an intravenous line to supply nutrients. Here you can see an example. This looks like a pig. It's been demonstrated on a number of species. This happens to be a pig, but it's also been done with sheep and a few other mammals, I think. So what I found, I think this was one of the women involved in this project. What I found very impressive or captivating was the design. They did a really good job with the aesthetics of the device. If you look closely here, you'll see a sort of red tube that goes around. And sort of for aesthetic reasons, they want to have some of the blood pumped around in this tube to kind of show how the device is working. This is a mannequin showing a prototype mock-up of the device. Here's a closer look at that. I think the aesthetic design was really good. So yeah, this is preemie. I was told that this was a little bit controversial since some of the engineering has not fully been worked out. Obviously, there's a lot of engineering challenges in miniaturizing the components. For instance, the blood oxygenation pumps and the nutrient supply. That all has to be miniaturized and fit into this device, and they still haven't done that. But I think that they're well on their way here to a very interesting device. The vision here is really an artificial womb that is wearable, which I think is really cool from a transhumanist perspective. So that's preemie. Now, there were a number of projects that used this technique called myocartography or myoelectrical recording. This essentially is a way of, a technology that's been around probably 50 or even 75 years, where you just have a simple electrode on the surface of the skin and it will detect any kind of muscle contractions that are underneath wherever the electrode is placed. So I wasn't fully sure how this worked exactly, but they had this demo where there were these electrodes that you attach behind your ears, and somehow they were able to control a robotic drone using this. So first, you could also control this red dot here, and that was used for initial calibration and training. And then once you had learned how to control the red dot, then you could move to controlling the drone. Again, I wasn't fully sure how this worked, but it looked pretty impressive. And I think this is actually a lot easier to do than using EEG, because EEG headsets tend to be very noisy, and especially when they're dry EEGs that don't have conductive gels applied onto the scalp. So this is, again, relatively simple, but I'd never seen anything like this done. So I thought it was pretty impressive. Let me jump ahead a bit. This was another project about the myoelectrography or electromyography. Here, they essentially are just showing a basic demo of how they can detect muscle contractions in the bicep. And this can be used for controlling prosthetic limbs. I think this has already been demonstrated, so nothing too new here, but it was still pretty impressive to see this live demonstration. Here's another look at it. And then this was essentially a wearable EEG-based headset or headband. And what this guy was doing was he was showing how he could play this Tetris-like game just using his mind by itself. It's just through the power of his brainwaves, apparently. Oh, and then also there was a vibrating feedback devices in there as well. So pretty amazing demo. This was another myocartography device. I'm not actually sure. I didn't really get to talk to these people, and I couldn't find any information about this online. But essentially, they had some way of allowing people who are quadriplegic or people with spinal cord injuries to control a cursor on the screen so they could draw on the screen. Again, I'm not really sure how this worked exactly. I didn't get to talk to these people, but looked pretty interesting. These were researchers from NYU. Now, this is really interesting because this is a wearable AI device. There's a new generation of these wearable devices that's coming online right now. There's an open source project called Friend that you can find where you can actually build one of these for about $75. It's basically just a camera, microphone, and a 4G cellular transmitter. And it will transmit the audio and still images to GPT-4. And GPT-4 will analyze the images and analyze the audio and essentially create an archive of everything that you've heard and everything that you've seen. And obviously, this could be a memory augmentation. The trick to making it useful lies within being able to search this enormous archive of images and transcribed audio. They call this particular project Iris. This was pretty cool. The next person here, this is Ninon Mascliffe. She's a media artist and research scientist, and she's just starting her research at the MIT Media Lab now. And she's done a number of projects. I think I'll discuss two of them here, but she's done several. One of them was called Dream, and this was another EEG-based project. The concept here is to have an EEG device that you wear during sleep. And this is a prototype of the device. And this can be used for sleep tracking, but they also claim that theoretically in the future, this could actually be used to decode dreams and essentially infer the imagery of the dream using deep learning based decoding devices. And so essentially this is a dream reading device. So dream reading has been demonstrated for fMRI, but obviously that requires that you're sleeping within an fMRI machine, which is a very bulky device. And there's really no way to miniaturize fMRI with current technology because it requires extremely high magnetic fields. And right now that requires very, very large electromagnets, which are often cooled with liquid helium. So the idea of dream reading or dream decoding has been demonstrated with fMRI. Here they're claiming that in the future, they'll be able to do this with EEG. I'm fairly skeptical of this claim, but it may be possible with advanced enough deep learning decoders. As they say here, this is from a video they have online. They say, our proposed dream recording methodology will allow us to record dreams directly from the sleeping brain, producing more accurate and objective dream reports. Theoretically, these could have some use in psychology and psychotherapy. They say the data is transferred from the EEG device into a computer where an ML model translates it into a text-based dream description. So they've been talking about generating images to show kind of what was in the dream and also text reports. So that was one project. The other project which she showed was this wearable device. I'm not really sure what you call it exactly, but it's essentially a wearable with LED lights that is attached to an EEG headset. And what this does is it measures her emotional state. So based on her emotional state, the LED lights will change colors. Here, this is the video. Can you guys see how the lights are changing colors?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Now, let me skip forward. So that's the wearable she presented. This is another wearable. It's basically the same concept. It's just different aesthetics. Same concept though. There's LED lights that change color depending on her emotional state. So whether she's stressed, anxious, happy, angry, different things like that, there'll be different colors. Yeah, she calls it strange loops. This is another video showing the second wearable. It's mostly an artistic endeavor, but this could actually help people understand the emotional state of a person. And I think that this was actually designed using a 3D model of her head and 3D printing. So it's custom fit to her facial geometry and head geometry. And here she mentions these different brainwave bands. So the EEG is listening for these different types of brain waves, delta, theta, alpha, beta, and gamma. Depending on the relative levels of these different brain waves, you can get an idea of stress level and emotional state. So there's the EEG, right? There's the actual EEG device. Essentially, it's a just a band that goes over the head. So normally this would be very noisy data. If you were trying to use this, for instance, to control a mouse on a computer screen or something, I think it would be very difficult because there's not many channels. There's probably only a few electrodes in this, so there's not many channels of recording. And as you can see, it doesn't actually fit very close to the head or the scalp of so normally this would be very noisy data that wouldn't be very useful, but in this case, she's just measuring the overall spectrum of brain waves. So it's good enough for this purpose. And yeah, so I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, this was the memory. This is more about that memory augmentation thing I mentioned, the Iris project. Here you can see actually a prototype of how the images could be accessed on your phone. So essentially, this device is taking images every few seconds and uploading them to the cloud. And furthermore, GPT-4 is analyzing all these images and creating text descriptions of what's in the image. So that way you can search through these images very quickly to find, using the text, to find, so for instance, if you were touring through New York City, it would be taking pictures every 3 seconds. And if you wanted to say, see the pictures or see what you saw when you were at the Brooklyn Bridge or the Empire State Building or Statue of Liberty, you could quickly find those pictures using the text generated from GPT-4. And then the AI could also give you tips. So for instance, if you're cooking, the AI can see what ingredients you have on the table, what kind of things you have in your kitchen, that sort of thing. But this is mainly being developed as a memory augmentation. In the future, it says there may be proactive AI notifications, but it was mainly a memory device. One other thing I wanted to say about this is this whole dream of memory augmentation is very old. It actually goes back to Vannevar Bush, who was the guy who essentially helped create the National Science Foundation. And in the mid 1940s and early 1950s, when computers were first being developed, he had the idea that computers could be used to augment human memory. And he had this idea of what he called the memex, which would be a computer-based augmentation of human memory. The challenge with implementing the memex device has always been retrieving the right information. But now I think with the help of AI technology like GPT-4, Vannevar Bush's dream of the Memex is finally becoming a reality, since GPT-4 can essentially help search through, essentially can generate text descriptions of these images, which can be searched through. And it can also enable search through images and text data using natural language. So you can kind of describe in natural language what you're looking for, and then it can help retrieve the right data, either text or images. So I think that we're going to see a lot more of this kind of technology using AI to help retrieve information. It could be either a database of information, or it could be a data like Wikipedia, or it could be a database of images and transcribed audio from your own life, which is captured via one of these wearable devices. So I think this is very exciting from a transhumanist perspective. Now, another project which I want to spend some time on is called Fresh, and I thought this was an extremely ambitious project. This was done by a augmentation lab resident named Jacob Treble, and this is another wearable device. So you can see it's actually very similar to the one I just showed, and it's essentially a small device, probably cost about $200 to build. Again, it consists of a battery pack, camera, microphone, and a cellular device. And it's very similar to what I just showed. But what's interesting about this from a transhumanist perspective is that he wants to use the images and audio that it's capturing to create an AI longevity coach. So this is a very ambitious project, but I think that he's well on his way to realizing this incredible vision. The problem, so it's the end goal here is an AI coach that helps you with longevity by looking at your lifestyle and giving you tips for how to improve your lifestyle and also nutrition. So there's been a number of nutrition apps, for counting your calories. There's an app called Chronometer. There's a number that I actually have on my phone. You can see, I don't know if you can see that, but there's a large number of these apps which are for tracking your nutritional intake. The problem with these apps is that you have to log in everything that you're eating, which is very time consuming. But using the power of GPT-4 and this sort of wearable, the vision here is that this device would essentially see everything that you're eating and be able to then give you personalized coaching on how to improve your nutrition. this is a presentation he gave. You can see different wearables here. He calls it Fresh Nutrition Coach. You can see right here, it says Nutrition Coach for Longevity. He says here, longevity communities are passionate technology early adopters. This is the device. Here you can see sort of the live photo stream. So here there's a, it looks like a soda can. Using GPT-4, GPT-4 can actually analyze these images, determine what kind of soda he was drinking, and then log that for analysis. In fact, here you can see that essentially GPT-4 was able to figure out that, I don't know if this is real or not, but what he was showing was GPT-4 was able to determine that in this particular case, he was consuming Olipop Orange Squeeze, a prebiotic soda with 45 calories and 9 grams of sugar per can. Now, one of the exciting things here is he's going to be presenting this at the Brian Johnson's Don't Die Summit. So Brian Johnson is having a huge summit in San Francisco in, I think, about 1 week. So this is all moving very fast. He also says the vision here is to also integrate it with all of your apps. So essentially it sees what apps you're using. There's also a web interface where it sees what apps you are accessing and also what websites you are going to. So he actually has this whole thing pretty well developed. This is showing how essentially it can monitor your web browsing history. And so you can see graphs of what kind of websites you are viewing over time. In this case, he's looking at machine learning related websites. He's graphing how many machine learning related websites he was viewing over time, over the course of a month or so. So I thought that was pretty impressive. And this is just a picture of the Don't Die Summit. You can look this up online. The component that looks at browser history, he calls Browseback. It's all being developed right now. Continuing on, this was a new EEG wearable head cap that's under development right now. It's basically a incremental improvement in a number of ways beyond what we have today. So this EEG wearable has 150 pin plugs. So there's a lot of electrodes on here. And it also can be sized pretty easily to fit different head sizes. The interesting thing about this from a transhumanist perspective is that you could actually wear this without anyone actually knowing that you're wearing it, because it's basically designed with the same sort of mesh that is used for a wig. So you can actually wear a wig over this. This is showing what it looks like. It's, you know, it's very well designed, I would say. It has a battery pack built in and wireless connectivity. Like I said, it was inspired by the hair meshes that are used for, or the meshes that are used for wigs, like shown here. And on the website for this, they actually show how this could be fully concealed. So you could be using this on the job, for instance, to monitor your fatigue levels or for other purposes without anyone even noticing that you're using it. So I thought that was pretty interesting. This is the team that developed it. Just wanted to give them some credit for this. It's a really good design. And then finally, I wanted to discuss Jacob Cole. So Jacob Cole was there. He was a Princeton undergraduate who graduated a few years ago. And while he's sort of known in the transhumanist community because when he was at Princeton University, he hosted the Envision conference, which was a super transhumanist oriented conference. Since then, he's founded 2 startups. He had a table at the demo hall, and he had large posters for his 2 startups. The first startup is called Idea Flow AI. Essentially, this is some sort of highly advanced note-taking app, or what they call personal knowledge management system, KMS. And it's integrated with AI to help you search your notes. The other thing he mentioned is his newer startup, which is called Superconnector. And this is a platform which uses AI to basically network people together. So you basically explain to the AI your name and what you're interested in, what kind of work you do, and then the AI will find other individuals that may be worthwhile for you to network with. So anyone can join this platform for free right now. It's called Superconnector, and you can find it at superconnector.network. So, I guess there was one other thing here. This sort of odd-looking device was a highly advanced replacement knee and leg. So this is a prosthetic, or part of a prosthetic leg. And this was another project that used the myocartography. And so using muscle contractions from somewhere else in the body, you can actually control this robotic leg. I have a very short video clip here. And there was a very interesting video showing someone using this on a treadmill, but unfortunately he didn't want to send me the video and I wasn't allowed to film it because this hasn't actually been released to the public for public consumption yet. And apparently they're working on some sort of academic paper on this, so he didn't want me to show the video of the guy on the treadmill, but there was a video of a guy running on a treadmill using this prosthetic leg. I guess there's another project here. Honestly, I don't even remember what this was. This was something with an Apple Vision Pro, which is the most advanced VR AR headset on the market. And it was something using very advanced eye tracking. So it was using the eye tracking capabilities of the Vision Pro to do something, but I'm not exactly sure what it was. This is the final project that I saw. Essentially, this was not really an augmentation. It was more of a conventional software product. But the idea here is to make it easier for people to export their data from social media sites. Right now, the process is different for every social media site, and it can involve a lot of clicks and navigating through a lot of different pages. So it's a bit laborious. If you wanted to, for instance, download your entire social media history from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and other platforms, it would be quite a time-consuming process. So he's working on a web-based application that basically allows you to do all this very quickly and easily. So I think this is a great service for that he's creating this website, and I think it's a website. I'm not exactly sure, to be honest, but it's some sort of software. So those are all the projects. Do we want to do some discussion now, or should we go on?
Let's do a bit of discussion because we do have some questions, and I will start with a question of my own. So in regard to this augmentation residency program where you provided the time frame, it's an 8-week time frame for the residents to develop a minimum ambitious, especially if one is trying to design a new technology that will revolutionize or greatly enhance some aspect of human life. So I wonder, can this really be done in 8 weeks, or does there have to be a lot of prior preparation before the residents enter the program? And even then, if they're scrambling to create something within 8 weeks, is it really a finished usable product, or do they have to take certain shortcuts to have something to demonstrate, but perhaps the inner workings aren't fully ready to be released to actual users?
Right. Yeah, these were really prototypes, at least the augmentation lab projects. Not all of these were augmentation lab residence projects. Like, for instance, the EEG cap, that was a completely separate project. The knee joint was a separate project. Jacob Cole's startups were completely separate, but the for the augmentation lab projects I showed, they were really minimal viable products or prototypes. So, for instance, the Preemie device for premature babies, that was mostly just a mock-up. They had really not done any of the hardcore engineering that would be necessary. They did have a small pump inside it, which was pumping red liquid around the outside, but otherwise there's nothing built inside of it yet. But I still thought it was very impressive from an aesthetic standpoint and from a marketing standpoint. The thing which shows emotions, that was fully developed, but actually that was sort of based off previous work that she had done. So I think she was leveraging a lot of. But the most impressive augmentation lab resonance project was the two, actually the fresh, I think it's, what was it, what was it called, fresh, yeah, the fresh nutrition coach for longevity. That was very impressive, and that was an augmentation lab resident project. I don't know if he had worked on that previously. I would not be surprised if he had already been working on that, because that was very impressive. And then the other wearable for memory enhancement, that was also fairly impressive. but it's actually relatively easy to build those wearable devices now. You can find plans and blueprints online and detailed instructions online of how to build them. So that's relatively easy. It's more the software and AI integration that's challenging. And also bear in mind that I'm just showing the kind of the highlights. There were a couple augmentation lab residence projects that weren't covered here that maybe weren't quite as impressive or interesting from a transhumanist perspective.
Yes, thank you, Dan. And Alan wrote in the comments that a minimum viable product is the goal for a 3-day startup weekend. So not even 8 weeks, but 3 days. Alan, if you would like to elaborate on that, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Gennady. Of course, their MVP is not about some life-saving, joint technology that's guided in accordance with the wearer's, mental model. It's typically it's more about the business model. It's open to all sorts of the weekends are open to all sorts of ideas. So typically they're much closer to this technology is ready to go, or I'm going to use this technology in my tech stack to create this product or service. Not on the cutting edge like we're talking about here. But I was really impressed with the little chart. The chart that you had at the beginning that showed each week in the 8 weeks lined up almost identically with the 3-day weekend of startup weekend, which starts Friday night with the ideation and presenting ideas, building teams around the ideas, all the way to presenting to a panel of judges for critiques and prizes. It's a non-cash, non-grant situation.
Yeah, I think they were working very hard, and by the way, they have a dedicated office space here.
Nice.
There's a new organization here called Ethos, spelled AETHOS, and they made available their office space. So they had this really nice space available, and I imagine they were spending a lot of time there working on these projects. It is more challenging than a normal hackathon because they are actually trying to, in most cases, have physical hardware involved, and that I think that's always a bit more time consuming. But yeah, it's kind of like an extended hackathon almost.
This looks like, am I still on? Sorry, I was going to say that this really looks like the type of incubator that would be great for sending people to the CryoDAO kind of, or some other type of grant process. I mean, they're not necessarily working on cryonics, but a grant process like that would be a nice end cap or some next step for this.
Yes, I'm not. So I think some of these were one-off projects, but a lot of them I think they're trying to develop now into startups. So if anyone watching this is an angel investor, you can you can check them out and maybe see if you want to invest in their startup.
Another question from Alan is with regard to the EEG cap. Does hair disrupt connectivity? If somebody is not bald, for instance, then is that an issue when wearing that cap?
Yes, yeah, it's a major issue because really you want those electrodes to be as close to the scalp as possible. When you get an EEG done in a laboratory environment, they actually have to apply a conductive paste to your scalp in order to ensure a good contact. Otherwise, you have this impedance mismatch, and it's much harder to detect the signals. So in a lab, they apply that paste, and it's actually a very time-consuming process because they have to apply the paste, and then they have to position each electrode properly So it's a messy and time-consuming process. That's why basically all the consumer EEG devices are just what they call dry EEG, which is just placed directly on the head. And you end up with a lot of noise because of the poor, um, basically, signal conduction. And I think they also move around a little bit, which adds noise. So with this, I actually like this design because you could actually shave yourself bald. Like, so if, for instance, you were going to wear this every day, uh, for some sort of augmentation, like controlling a mouse on a computer screen, or maybe the dream reading, dream interpretation thing. If you're gonna wear it every day, then you could actually shave your head and have a wig on top, theoretically. So
It's interesting to think that baldness might be an adaptation, a beneficial adaptation for being able to receive these non-invasive brain enhancements. But thank you for that
yeah.
response, Dan. And Alan has a further question. He wonders what initiatives for biological or genetic modification, if any, were presented at the conference. It seems that the vast majority of the augmentations discussed were in the form of external devices. Even the preemie artificial womb is essentially something that doesn't even necessarily require the mother. It's just essentially
Yeah.
attached for purposes of bonding. But were there any proposals that actually involve modifying human biology?
No, I don't really think that was the real focus here. I think the focus was supposed to be more on AI and wearable devices, like if you look at their website. That said, the augmentation lab as a whole seems to have a more general disposition towards human augmentation and enhancement. So I imagine genetic engineering would be something they're interested in, but it wasn't really the focus of this residency program. But I think it's something they are interested in, and they've been interested in some of the ethical discussions as well around human enhancement.
Yes, thank you for that response. It is probably significantly easier at this point to implement an external augmentation via a device, since human genetic engineering is in fairly early stages still. We do have some gene therapies for rare diseases and a few experiments in terms of human germline modification that were, let's say, unsanctioned, but there's not yet a reliable way to scale that. So that makes sense in terms of what their focus is at present. And then the last question before we go on to your report about the meeting with David Sinclair is from Jason Geringer. He wonders what augmentations you would all get if you could. He says he would get better eyes and teeth. I would certainly favor durability of organs, be those, say, my legs, my joints, I'm a runner, or organs such as the heart or the lungs, which do get worn out with age and with use. So if I could, for instance, exercise as much as I wanted, knowing that there would be no excessive cardiac strain from that, that would be, I think, a major boost to longevity and the ability to sustain an otherwise healthy habit. Of course, I am interested in brain augmentations, but the less invasive, the better in terms of at least the proximate term. In the longer term, I would be interested in artificial neurons, again, if it's possible to deliver them non-invasively, like through some sort of nanobot or microscopic robot that could pass through the blood-brain barrier and just graft itself onto the brain, that would be preferable to surgery, in my view. But Art Ramon, what would you get if you could have enhancements?
In the short term, what I would like is like an exoskeleton suit so that I can enjoy myself hiking again. I haven't been able to hike elevation. I could do distance if I do a lot of practice and don't miss a week. I could increase my distance, but I'm having a heck of a time trying to increase my elevation because it's just so difficult. And right now I'm doing like 300 feet of elevation gain. I'm just dead tired. I've been able to work up to 900 feet, but that's all I've done. I mean, I just hit this limiting factor ever since I got COVID, where my muscles just fatigue quickly. So I know there are certain prototype exoskeletons out there right now, but they're very costly. But that would be my dream, is to get some sort of exoskeleton so that I can move, get out in nature, move, get some sort of exercise, push my body to the limit as far as it can go, then rely on the rest for the exoskeleton to get to a higher level. And then on the way down, I could use my natural strength and get more of a workout, since a lot of the difficulty is going upwards.
Yes, thank you for that answer. And now let's go to Alan.
Thank you. We were just discussing Art Ramon's art. But yeah, I love the idea of the exoskeleton, but for that question, it would be eyes for me. I've had 8 eye surgeries. I had radial keratotomy back in the days when it was done with a scalpel. Not quite the Stone Ages, but the scalpel ages. Now it's called LASIK. And then also macular damage I had repaired with a laser. And I've had 2 interocular lenses installed. So yeah, I think a new pair of eyes would be fantastic. What about you, John? What would you?
Well, when I started thinking about this, when the question was posed, I thought about my joints, because I used to be a runner and now I do other things. But actually, the older I get, the more I think about my brain. That scares me to lose that. And I don't know, if I lose my body and ability to do something, that's one thing. But to not remember or be able to speak or communicate clearly would really hamper me, I think. I'd be a little freaked out.
Yes, indeed.
So I think that's what I would look for.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, especially if I get one of those fancy hats and I can work my computer without having to type.
But you need to perfect. I'm not going to shave my head. I would be embarrassed for myself and everybody that had to look at me.
You could get a wig. All right.
Well, thank you for both of your responses. I think it was essentially only in ancient Egypt that women in the nobility would shave their heads and wear wigs. But generally, in later eras of human history and society, sometimes the men would shave their heads or have very close trimmed hairstyles to be able to accommodate the wigs, but the women would generally not do that. They would get these elaborate hair extensions. But Dan, what augmentations would you get if you could?
I think memory is the thing that comes to mind the first. I'm always annoyed with how poor my memory is. Like, sometimes I meet people at meetups and they claim we met previously at the meetup, and I don't really remember at all because I meet so many people at meetups. Obviously, I'm not. It would be nicer to be able to remember people's names, and also, various programming related things. So I think memory augmentation would be one of the top ones I'd like to, and then just improving my energy levels a bit, since I still have some fatigue problems. Like, probably some of them are some lingering a bit from long COVID. So that's more of a
Dan, you remind me of my father's admonition to me. He said the shortest pencil is better than the longest memory. And maybe we'll prove him wrong one day by augmenting our memories. But,
Yes, indeed. Let's see. Dan, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry.
Okay.
My microphone switched.
All right. Thank you, Dan, for that response. And now let us hear your report of your meeting with Dr. David Sinclair.
All right. Well, this was a special event hosted by Manolis Kellis just this weekend on Saturday, so 2 days ago. For those of you who don't know, Manolis Kellis is a very famous expert on bioinformatics and genetics, who is a professor at MIT at the CSAIL Computer Science Center. So he's pretty famous in his own right. And he's been on Lex Friedman's podcast, for instance. But apparently he does a series of these events, which he calls salons, kind of like the Enlightenment Salon, but a little bit bigger. And somehow I got on the email list for his salons. This one was hosted at a fairly large mansion in an area called Marblehead, which is about 50 minutes north of Boston on the coast. So this is a picture here at the opening of the event. And just give me a sec. This guy here is, in case you didn't realize, is David Sinclair, and to his right is one of the other hosts, a guy named Steve Wardle, who is a health tech and digital health investor. And this is Ethan Berg, who is the proprietor and owner of this estate and an investor. So obviously quite wealthy. Here's an aerial view, kind of looking down from the balcony. This is a picture someone else took. Kind of gives you an idea of the vibe. There were a lot of big name people here, a lot of investors who are investing in longevity biotech, and quite a diverse group. There was an application process to get into this event. They had about 200 applicants, but because of the house could only fit about 60, they had to limit the number. So the main event was a discussion between Manolis Kellis and David Sinclair. This is kind of what that looked like. There was a beautiful view of the ocean. And then there was, after this quite extended discussion between Manolis and David, there was audience discussion period where members of the audience made comments and asked questions. So there's a this is a picture of me with Manolis Kellis. He's quite a friendly guy. And then I think we have a video recording I took of David Sinclair. He made some interesting remarks about the FDA that I wanted to share.
That wasn't there 5-10 years ago. So I think it's going to be grassroots pressuring the FDA from its citizens to increasingly realize that the way we currently practice medicine is only one small piece of how we really should be doing it. we should be taking care of our bodies from the moment we're conceived. And that's really the way to live longer. And eventually, aging will be considered a medical condition in the same way that we treat obesity now with the GLP-1 receptor agonist. Those molecules, by the way, are looking like anti-aging drugs at this point. They're remarkable. But until aging is considered a medical condition, doctors have to prescribe off-label, so that's limited. And drug companies have to chase particular diseases and then hope that, just like GLP-1 related drugs, that they have broader effects. And the companies that I start cannot go after aging, they have to go after blindness and other diseases. The moment one country declares aging a disease, and it might be Singapore, it could be the UAE, it could be Britain, it's probably not the US first, then I think there will be a domino effect. I predict that there will be a lot of attention on that country, investment, and a lot of others will follow. But countries, I've talked to a lot of leaders, they're looking to see those first. People are a bit worried about that. But there will be one country, UAE is talking about it very seriously, and they really don't want to be followers, they want people to follow them. So I think that could be it. There's one other wild card that I'm really interested in seeing what happens. How many of you have heard of this alternative to the Olympic Games?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Extreme Games?
Yeah. Enhanced Games.
Thank you, please. Yeah, I got it wrong. So the Enhanced Games could change the view of what it means to be human and allow it to be acceptable to enhance yourself. And so I look forward to the day when 90-year-olds can outrun a regular 30-year-old. That will happen. And then we really will be in a different mindset, I think. And I predict those games could be more popular than the regular ones.
Yeah. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But yeah, those are all the pictures, and I did take some notes on what David Sinclair said, so I'd be happy to relay a bit of that if you want.
Yes, please do.
Okay. Well, so he started talking about how they have been able to quantify aging using the epigenetic aging clocks, and essentially they show that the aging that people age at different rates, and a lot of that has to do with the stress levels. And so he mentioned one fact I wasn't aware of, which is that pregnancy in women actually accelerates aging in terms of the epigenetic aging. So even though women tend to live longer than men, pregnancy is very stressful on the body, so it actually accelerates epigenetic aging. Let's see. He also talked about the hallmarks of aging, and David Sinclair is kind of controversial because he claims that all of the hallmarks of aging actually are due to one underlying process, which is the epigenetic dysfunction and loss of epigenetic information, which basically causes cells to lose their identification. So and differentiation. So muscle cells start to behave a little bit more like other types of cells, like skin cells, neurons, that sort of thing. So he thinks that that one process of epigenetic dysfunction actually underlies all the other hallmarks of aging, which is very controversial within the broader longevity community. Now, I'll get back to the controversy around David Sinclair after these notes, after I finish reading the notes. But another interesting thing he mentioned is that they're studying children because children are able to heal much faster. And actually, in neonates or babies in the womb, if the optic nerve can actually grow back if it's severed, which I didn't know, but that's pretty interesting. And so they're looking at Yamanaka factors and other factors which can enhance tissue repair and regrowth. And they think those factors will help them with reversing aging. Another thing he talked about is some of the treatments they're developing, I believe with Yamanaka factors and possibly sirtuins, but I think he was mainly talking about Yamanaka factors. And apparently they've been able to rejuvenate the eyes of a mouse using these factors. And they have a way of actually accelerating the aging of the eye and giving the mouse glaucoma. And then they give this treatment and the glaucoma is reversed. And he was claiming that they've done this process 5 times in a row on the same mouse. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Actually, you know what it was? Sorry. You know what it was? It was a gene therapy. That's what it was. They have a AAV, which is a adeno-associated virus particle that specifically targets the retina and delivers a gene therapy. And they applied it in mice and monkeys. The other interesting thing he said is somebody asked him about cost for these gene therapies. He said it would cost about $100,000 in a human. But he said that to reach everyone on the planet, they have to reduce the cost to $1 a day. And that's why he thinks that and there were Yamanaka factors involved, but he thinks that they need to find a simple molecule that does better than the Yamanaka factors or the gene therapies. And he said so right now they've worked on restoring eyesight. The next step is restoring hearing and the hair cells in the ear. And that could help reverse age-related hearing loss in the elderly, which could help the elderly remain more social as they get older. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I haven't studied any of the details on this. I'm just relaying some notes I took. He also claimed that 99% of rapamycin use is for anti-aging now. He also claimed that the GDP of some countries is actually increasing due to increased health interventions. Somebody asked about oxygen, and he said that oxygen therapy is a bit of a double-edged sword because oxygen promotes free radicals. but he said that hyperbaric oxygen, which is where you go under high pressure oxygen, can help with wound healing. They're looking at Yamanaka factors, including this new synthetic Yamanaka factor called super socks. And yeah, and there was a couple other things, but yeah, those are some of the main notes. Now, David Sinclair is fairly controversial, partly because of his very radical theory of aging, but also because some of his early work with reversitrol has not replicated. And so some of the early work on resveratrol and some of his early work on sirtuins has not replicated. And so he's controversial for that reason, and also because he continues to sell reversitrol through his supplement company and promote it. So I think it's worth mentioning that even though he's overall a titan in the field and excellent researcher, he is somewhat controversial.
All right. Thank you for sharing those notes and observations. And I found it quite interesting that David Sinclair so strongly advocates for declaring aging a disease and thinks that it is quite possible that the United Arab Emirates will get there first. So there is perhaps more of a techno-optimistic and ambitious culture in the UAE when it comes to pursuing radical life extension, or at least seriously dealing with the problems of aging as contrasted with the United States. I wonder if there was any further discussion about this among the attendees, or any further comments that David Sinclair or Manolis Kellis made in this regard.
Yeah. Well, David Sinclair was very adamant that the FDA needs to declare aging a disease. One of the things I wrote in my notes is that he said that he thinks some treatments will not be commercializable until the FDA declares aging a disease. And he said that furthermore, with at least one or two of his companies, they have focused only on natural products, which can be classified as supplements, because it's so difficult to get through the FDA. Even though there's probably synthetic compounds that might be better. So I thought that was pretty interesting. As far as comparing the US with other countries, I think that was discussed briefly. He said that as soon as one country declares aging a disease, then hopefully other countries will follow suit.
Yes, that has been my analysis as well. There will be a domino effect because of competitive pressures. If one country, especially a smaller up-and-coming country, declares aging a disease and starts attracting researchers through various incentives, larger countries and their governments will not ignore that. And I think the more rational step would be for them to liberalize their definitions of what a disease is. But we need to get that first country. Maybe it will be the UAE, maybe it will be Argentina under Javier Milei, who has sympathies in that regard, and he certainly wouldn't mind additional business to revitalize Argentina's economy. Now, also, it is interesting that David Sinclair mentioned an idea that Zoltan Istvan, the founder of the US Transhumanist Party, actually pioneered, called the Transhumanist Olympics. And our current US Transhumanist Party platform is aligned with his ideas on that. Section 39 reads, the U.S. Transhumanist Party supports the creation of a transhumanist Olympics where augmentations and modifications of the human body would not disqualify persons from competing. Now, I also found it interesting that David Sinclair said he and his team essentially reversed signs of aging in mice and could do so repeatedly, but these were mice that were modified essentially to artificially bring about accelerated aging. And what I wonder, and what others have wondered as well, is whether that set of techniques would also translate to aging that occurs on its own. It's one matter to bring about a condition through a certain pathway and then reverse that pathway. But if the aging that occurs on its own occurs due to a greater multiplicity of pathways or different pathways, then the same technique might not work because that aging would have arisen from some different causes. What are your thoughts on that, Dan?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable question. I haven't really gotten to study their actual research. So I can't really comment further. I'm looking at the paper right now, but unfortunately, I can't view the full PDF. But yeah, they had a mouse model where they were the mice received some treatment that basically mimicked glaucoma, a certain type of I think what he called neuronal injury or something like that. The treatment, which I believe involved the Yamanaka factors. I think there were actually two studies. The first one was with Yamanaka factors in mice, and then I think there was another study with gene therapy in monkeys. But this one was with something like Yamanaka factors, and they said they did it 5 times in a row. Another thing you mentioned is that you can stress out cells using heat shocking or cold shocking, or even pressure. He mentioned like some applying pressure to the cells and literally crushing the cells. And when you apply these sort of stresses to the cells, that actually can be detected in the epigenome. There are changes to the epigenome involving those sirtuins, where basically the cells go into damage. The epigenome changes so that the cells go into damage repair mode. But then what happens is that after all the damage is repaired, the epigenome doesn't fully return to the initial state. I just started listening to David Sinclair's book. He describes it a bit like there was a hurricane and all the rescue crews came and tried and repaired everything. But then the rescue crews had trouble getting back, and then they couldn't quite get back to where they were originally. So something like that. Yeah. So
interesting.
That's the sort of mechanism which causes corrupt dysregulation or entropy epigenome.
Now, of course, the reason why exercise works is because there is some stress on the body, there is some damage, but right. When this damage is repaired in the rest period after exercise, the various tissues become stronger and other functions of the body.
So he talks about that as well. There's this concept of hormesis, which is that some stress is actually very good because, like you said, it encourages recovery and cellular cleanup process. and also can encourage muscle growth and other things, which is helpful for a variety of reasons. So he said actually he's a fan of things like saunas and cold plunges. But and actually I may not have fully explained that thing with the sirtuins quite correctly, but basically is the idea is that in certain cases that the sirtuins which are sort of like regulatory proteins in on the epigenome that operate on the epigenome level, they essentially regulate. They basically get mobilized in under stress, which to some degree I guess is good, but then if it's too much, that's where it starts to cause the epigenetic issues. Again, I may not be explaining this perfectly correctly, but that's my rough understanding.
The key is finding that proper balance where one gets the beneficial effects of that adaptation to stress, the hormesis that you mentioned, but one does not overdo it. I hypothesize that the reason why exercise is beneficial is because it stresses the body more acutely, though sustainably, and then there's a period of rest afterward. Whereas there are certain chronic stressors in life, which it is sometimes difficult to turn off. And those are the ones that can cause the lingering damage. But this is a very interesting discussion.
Yeah. And the other go ahead.
So now Alan has a question. Dan, what are your thoughts on the distinction between healthcare and life extension? Because our previous salon with Kai, Mike, and Mills really emphasized that distinction between, for instance, leading a healthy lifestyle and perhaps averting what today might be considered premature death, or getting a few extra years of healthy longevity, but no healthy lifestyle today can breach the maximum lifespan, apparent ceiling of about 120 years that we have with our current biology. So to get to 150 years or beyond, we would need rejuvenation biotechnology. What are your thoughts about this, and where do you think David Sinclair stands in this regard?
Well, life extension is not really a part of the current healthcare system, because aging isn't really viewed as a disease. And I think David Sinclair was right when he discussed this, because what he said was, like, until we recognize aging as a disease, it's not going to be something that most people are going to think about as something they want treated when they go to the doctor or to the healthcare system. So yeah, right now, life extension, longevity, it's really not something that's discussed or considered in the healthcare system. They do consider some of the age-related illnesses, like Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease, and there's some minimal level of preventative care that's provided. For instance, cholesterol level screening. Sometimes people get CAC scans of their heart to look for plaque in the heart, and then there's plaque. Or if you have very high cholesterol, they may apply some interventions like statins. But those are really just to treat the age-related illnesses, not aging itself, which is the underlying driver of a lot of that.
Yes, indeed.
So there
And
really
then-
needs to be a change in philosophy, and of course, more of a shift towards preventative care, I think. But
until we start treating aging itself, that 120-year ceiling will not be surpassed. And that point really needs to be driven home. I think there is a concern that right now a lot of the funding and a lot of attention in the longevity field broadly defined is directed toward essentially wellness practices, which again could give a person a few extra years, but aren't going to solve this fundamental problem of aging. And of course, the damage repair approach that is advocated by Dr. Aubrey de Grey essentially holds that it is actually easier to repair the damage that accumulates with aging than it is to slow down the aging process, because the aging process is a consequence of regular metabolism, essentially, and we will all experience it perhaps at slightly varying rates, but unless we do something to get rid of that damage and turn back the clock, even the most genetically lucky of us will succumb to aging and death before the age of 120.
And I think, if David Sinclair is right, and there is that, and the epigenetic dysfunction is the underlying driver or the main driver, that would actually make aging a lot more tractable than the damage repair approach, where there are the damage that the more conventional theory of aging, where there's at least 7 distinct contributors, 7 different forms of damage accumulation. And so, for instance, the SENS approach requires, I think, 7 or 8 different treatments, right? But if David Sinclair is correct, then you can cure a lot of aging with one treatment, which would be to basically help those sirtuins and maintain the epigenome properly. And I guess at one point he thought resveratrol was the way to do that, but now they're looking at other synthetic compounds, and they're looking at also NAD plus, not just to replace the NAD that is declining as you age, but also he claims that the NAD can help somehow with this epigenetic dysfunction. So they're looking at synthetic compounds, NAD plus, and I think Yamanaka factors possibly. But if you can treat that epigenome, the epigenetic dysfunction, that could be huge. But somebody asked David Sinclair if he'd like to live indefinitely and be essentially biologically immortal, and he did not answer the question, interestingly, but he said that that's not really what he's discussing. What he said was that if they're able to reverse the epigenetic dysfunction, like I just described, he imagined people could be able to live to 200 or 300, similar to sperm whales or bowhead whales. So that's sort of like what he's envisioning right now. 200
Very interesting.
years.
Very interesting.
I thought that was very interesting.
So he thinks right now there is this rate limiting factor of epigenetic dysfunction that is keeping maximum human lifespans at around 120 years. And if that one rate limiting factor were alleviated, then we could buy ourselves some time to 200 or 300 years, and then perhaps there could be other pathologies that would kill us at that point. But if he's right, we would have a lot more time to study what those pathologies are and figure out ways to
actually
alleviate them.
exactly. So this salon actually left me quite excited, because honestly, I was thinking that, you know, I might only live to 120, for instance, with the technology we have right now. And with something like Blueprint, for instance, I was thinking maybe I'll live to 120. But this really opens up the prospect of living much longer. And it's I've just started reading his book, which is what's it called? Lifespan. And I'm on chapter 3 right now. But essentially, he argues that you know, the rate at which different animals age is sort of genetically programmed. And so animals that are lower on the food chain tend to age much faster, because they have to reproduce. They have to they tend to reproduce a lot faster, and when energy goes into reproduction, there's less energy for repair. That's the whole idea of, quote, antagonistic pleiotropy. So it's essentially the idea of live fast, die young. So the idea is that there's when evolution invests in making a species develop quickly and reproduce quickly, there's negative effects later on in life. So anyway, so you have some species that generally are lower on the food chain. They have more predators, so they reproduce fast and then they die quickly. Whereas other species are able to pursue a little bit different strategy, where they develop more slowly, reproduce later, and then live longer. The most dramatic examples are things like apex predators, like the sperm whale. Certain birds that are higher up on the food chain actually can live quite long relative to other birds or small mammals. So he described humans as being somewhere in the middle of that spectrum.
Very interesting, because in the wild, our ancestors were not the apex predators. They were these intermediate-sized primates who were omnivorous, but sometimes they would have to climb the trees to hide from the big cats and other predators that could get them.
He said that. He actually mentioned how humans evolved on the savanna. It was a very harsh environment with certain predators.
Yes, indeed. So now let us open this up for questions about the meeting with David Sinclair and Manolis Kellis.
Well, I'm finding it fascinating. I've been looking up all these various people you're talking about who I'm less familiar with, and I've always been less keenly interested in the controversies surrounding the research, than the actual research. But to the extent it's good research, I think this is a issue that I've been grappling with ever since yesterday's salon. That this idea of, is death? I mean, is aging a disease? Do we want to use this incremental approach to move ourselves forward? Like, let's cure one ailment at a time till we run out of ailments. We may find there's a whole other pack of, just like people were surprised. What? Old folks get dementia? Well, nobody lived to 85 before, 20, 100 years ago. People weren't living to 85. So we might find that when we can live to 120, we find a new set of ailments that beset us. So the incremental approach, or like I say, if you can short circuit it and find that one gene that, hey, or expression of which will kind of stop the aging, hey, that's even more dramatic. So I don't think it's a zero-sum game. Like each dollar spent in one place is not a dollar in the others, because they may be coming from different pots of money, so to speak. But I think that we really want to support all of the research, and we want to support all the efforts in the longevity movement.
Yeah, and I absolutely, and I think that some people in the longevity community have become a little bit wary of David Sinclair, due to the resveratrol studies in mice not replicating, and some of the fact that he sells a lot of products. He had actually, I guess he had a startup a while ago called he was involved in called Certus, which was focused on compounds that would help the sirtuins and restore the epigenome. Apparently, that I don't think that company did very well.
It
more
got
recently,
sold to GlaxoSmithKline, and GlaxoSmithKline tried for a few years to essentially replicate its findings, but ended up closing the division that Certus turned into. And I don't have any inside knowledge about what happened, but apparently GlaxoSmithKline did not believe that this was a viable path forward. Now, why they did not believe this was a viable path forward, whether it was for scientific reasons or for shorter term commercial reasons, that I do not know. And that's where I think the jury is still out in regard to whether there was anything fundamentally wrong with the science, or whether a big pharma company just couldn't see a way to make money from a longer term possible solution to aging.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of controversy around that. And I'm not really up on that controversy, but some people think the science, the underlying studies were poorly done. Other people, I think the science was sound, but it was killed for other reasons, maybe regulatory hurdles. So I think there's a lot of controversy about that company. Then there's the resveratrol controversy. And then he has a number of other companies, including a supplement company, which called Tally Health. And they sell supplements and aging blood tests. And at least till recently, one of the supplements contained resveratrol. I'm looking on the website now, and I don't see anything about. Oh, yeah, it contains trans resveratrol. So that's a bit controversial. The other thing that he mentioned during the salon is that his wife also has a supplement company which sells a sleep supplement, and the name of that supplement is Sweet Dreams. And I actually looked at that, and I was actually quite impressed with the formulation. It's all except for ashwagandha. I'm not a big fan of ashwagandha, but it has a number of ingredients. So I thought it was a fairly good formulation. I might actually try it myself. But as you can kind of see, or he tends to promote his supplement companies a lot, which also makes him a bit controversial. But I think it's important that we not let that dissuade us from exploring the theory that he has and the underlying scientific hypotheses he's been pursuing. Because if he's right, aging could be a lot more treatable than, quite honestly, than the way it's being treated with the SENS approach.
Very interesting. And I agree. I think we need to explore any avenue that seems promising or looks like the jury is still out, that it could still be investigated in some reasonable, scientifically rigorous fashion. And then we could find out, is this an avenue that could bring us some gains in the foreseeable future?
And we may have better ideas soon with some of the studies on dogs. Because right now, most of the studies, I think, have been on mice. Like, they've basically doubled the lifespan of mice with some of these sirtuin promoters or sirtuin helpers and other types of things. And then the original work he did was actually on yeast, which I just learned about from the book. Back when David Sinclair first started in the field, the idea of using yeast as a model organism was very new, and a lot of people thought it was crazy. But it turns out that yeast are actually more similar to human cells than you might think, because they're, even though yeast diverged from humans about 1 billion years ago, the yeast cell is a eukaryotic cell, like a human cell. And it's actually, he described it in the book as quite complicated. So it turns out the yeast cells are actually, you can learn a lot about human biology just from studying yeast cells. And some of the first age-related genes were discovered in yeast cells, and some of the pioneering work on sirtuins was in yeast. And there's even some types of yeast that reproduce sexually, which I didn't know either. So the first studies were done on yeast, and then they went to mice. But then there's always a question of how well things will translate from mice to humans. And I think hopefully we'll get some more insight into that soon.
Indeed. And of course, here at the U.S. Transhumanist Party, we encourage all of these research pathways to proceed as quickly as feasible so that we can gain the greatest possible insights in time for us and the people watching the salon, in time to reverse all of our aging. Thank you, Dan, for joining us today. We have learned a lot from your reports, both from the Human Augmentation Summit and the salon with David Sinclair and Manolis Kellis. Perhaps someday we will have each of them as our own salon guests. It would certainly be fascinating to delve into their research in greater depth. And until then, let us all live long and prosper.